Coming up, the ubiquity of big data.
That is big data. It is you. It is 65 billion location-tagged payments that happen annually in the United States. It's 154 billion emails.
Author Patrick Tucker discusses why we should all be excited for a technologically enhanced future. It's just ahead on Global Ethics Forum.
Our speaker is Patrick Tucker. He is the author of The Naked Future: What Happens in a World That Anticipates Your Every Move. In March of this year, this book was cited as an Amazon Best Book of the Month.
Interesting thing that just happened. It happens every time somebody gives a talk. They come up and someone says, turn off your cell phones, right? I'm going to do something a little bit crazy here for a moment. Go ahead. I can't because I'm mic'd. Everyone else, take out your cell phone and turn it on. Turn it on. Yeah, turn it on. Now here's what's going to happen. The two things are going to happen as we do this. Number one, at some point during the presentation, someone's phone is going to ring. That person has to answer the phone, and we all have to say hello to whoever is on the other end. The second thing that happens whenever you turn on your phone is this. Your phone is contacted by a cell base station, what we call a cell tower, and they begin trading signals. A lot of people know this. What a lot of people don't know is that that cell tower then begins talking to other cell towers that are around it. And then they begin trading signals too. And the number of cell towers that engage in these sorts of conversations has been rapidly advancing. So it's a great big conversation among a whole bunch of different machines about where you are and where you're going. And they're having that conversation so that the cell towers can figure out which cell tower is the best one to provide your phone with service. A little bit weird, right? Now, if you're like me, you have a smartphone. This is mine. I usually keep the GPS capability on my smartphone turned off because it sort of eats my battery life. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. Yours is probably on too. The second I do this, what happens is my phone begins to receive signals from the Global Positioning System, which is a network of satellites originally created by DARPA. And they begin, off of that, also having conversations with my carrier about where I'm going, what I'm going to do. So I think this is really miraculous. Raise your hand if you have a smartphone. Okay. It's everybody, including the guy not raising his hand because he's playing with his smartphone. So officially, smartphone penetration in the United States right now is 70% of the United States population. But you can walk into any room in this country and you can ask people, hey, are you carrying around a device that's constantly talking about you to a wide network of other machines and receiving signals from space? And everyone will raise their hand yes. But no one thinks to ask, what are those machines saying about me right now? We don't. This is big data. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about big data, is those conversations that are happening right now between all of our machines about us. So with email and video and music streaming and posting and tweeting, mostly streaming, we create on the order of 1.8 million megabytes of data each year just through passive interactions with machines. It's about 9 CD-ROMs a day. That's IDC. IBM has some numbers that compete with that actually put that a little bit higher. And that is big data. It is you. It is 65 billion location-tagged payments that happen annually in the United States. It's 154 billion emails. It is the reason why 90% of all of the data in the world was generated within just the last 3 years. Those are some very large numbers, but the thing to keep in mind about that is that as big as they sound, there's going to be 44 times as much digital information in the year 2020 as there was in 2009. So 44 times. This is really key. It's not just a silly statistic. It really speaks to why I wrote this book, because you can't say you've got a way out. You might hate everything about the digital ecosystem. You might really resent the fact that your phone seems to be conversing with unseen parties about you all the time in a language that you can't hear. You might really object to it, and you should, but that doesn't mean we're going back. You can't go from 44 times as much digital information in 2020 to 43 times, to 39 times. We can all get up and walk outside and throw our phones in the street and really decide to inconvenience ourselves for a couple of weeks until we finally burst. But basically, we're going to be creating exponentially more data in the year 2020 than we do right now. There is no going back. Welcome. It's happening. Think about it this way, too. In 2008, the number of interconnected devices first surpassed the human population. And in the year 2020, this is according to Cisco, the number of interconnected devices will be 50 billion. So if they all decided to join ranks against us, it's 50 billion to what is projected to be 7.6 billion people. So we're already toast, as long as we're talking about machines having conversations with one another about us. So with that in mind, for me, the next question was, what if I understood more about what this phone is saying about me with those cell towers? What if I could make more use of that information? Somebody out there is able to make use of that information. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. It's ultimately for people. Machines themselves have no agenda. They want only to live. People make use of that information. What if I were one of those people? What if I decided I wanted to be someone who understood or could find relevance in my phone's conversations with cell towers and with satellites? This, for me, is a really important point because I believe that the most important theme of the next 2 decades is the rising tension between empowered individuals and declining institutions. And here's what I mean by that. For a long time, I was a deputy editor of a magazine called The Futurist, and I'm still their editor at large. It was a really fun job, and every so often I got to talk with science fiction authors, and I talked with Cory Doctorow once, and I asked him, how do you come up with the ideas for your science fiction? And he said, pick something that's difficult, complicated, and expensive for people to do, and then imagine that thing becoming simple, cheap, and inexpensive, and write about it because that's what's happening. And that's the story of the future. That is the story of big data, too. It's the story of computation, something that was expensive and complicated, that lived in university warehouses, the University of Pennsylvania, that was really large and didn't perform very well, got cheaper, it became more numerous, it moved from academic military thing to a B2B thing, and finally to something that empowered the consumer revolution. And that's the story of all computation. It's the story of big data, too. Believe it. Big data right now is something that it seems like governments created, that businesses use to triangulate your behavior. And the good news is that there's no reason why it can't be something that you use as well. You created this data. You have to ask for it, you have to demand it, you have to demand changes in law, you have to demand laws to protect you, but it's yours, you made it. And that's the story of technology. As it becomes cheaper, it becomes more available to more people, governments, to business, to finally consumers. So be excited about that. That's the first thing I want you to do. The future is inevitable. You have to be excited about it. So that's, over the course of the last year, this led me to write this book. It was a really fun, amazing project. And I went out to find people that were doing just that, that were learning how to listen and make use of the data that we create through all of our interactions. And they happened upon some really remarkable insights. Here's a case in point. Raise your hand if you know with 80% certainty or higher where you are going to be a year and a half from right now. Raise your hand if you know that. Every time I do this, there's always one person that raises their hand. It's like the first time they didn't do it. And I always look at them like, really? You can't know this. If you know where somebody lives, you know where somebody works, you have 2 data points, and you can make a reasonable inference, and that's your baseline. It's going to get you 50% accuracy, but it's a guess. It's a guess based on two data points. It's not accuracy. Now, here's the thing. This is information that you're giving away all the time in your phone. Your phone knows. 2 researchers, Adam Sedeliak and John Kroom. Adam Sedeliak is now with Google. He was at a University of Rochester. He's a very young man, brilliant. John Kroom is with Microsoft since forever. They wanted to see how you could use someone's location data if you had a large enough data set, a big data set, to predict where they were going to be. So John Kroom came up with this really remarkable experiment. He took some Microsoft money and he found a whole bunch of test subjects and he paid them money to carry around a GPS receiver, not at all unlike the one that's constantly talking to the satellites in your phone. And after 3,200 days of GPS recordings, it's a long time, it's like 6 years of just watching people walk around and seeing every place that they go, he found that he could predict a subject's future location 80 weeks in advance with higher than 80% accuracy. We're not quite as random as we think. There are these underlying patterns that bubble up that we can't pay attention to because we don't have perfect memory, or at least we didn't. But now we do. It is our memory, too. We buy this device, someone else gets the data, but we made it. and it's stored here for us. So the next question is, all right, if I am like Adam Steliak, if I am like John Crow, I'm a regular person, and I can predict my future location with 80% advance, then that's sort of cool. But what would I do with that? We can be dystopian, and we can say, I don't want to live in a world where that's possible because that means someone's going to stalk me and grab me and ambush me, and it's terrible. And that's true if only one person has that capability and nobody else does. But if everybody has it, then all of a sudden what was living in a dystopian world full of surveillance becomes living with a superpower. So what would a regular person do with that power, like just a normal person? Adam Steliak teamed up with a couple of researchers from Johns Hopkins, and what they found was that using that formula, you could predict with a pretty good amount of accuracy the next person to give you a cold. Now here's how it works. So they took 4 million tweets from about 6,000 New Yorkers. And these were geotagged tweets. So people posting to Twitter where they were, how they felt, where they were going. And he extrapolated from that this enormous network, and he saw all of these different interlinks between these people. And these were people that were making very public broadcasts, again, about their state of being and where they were headed. And he found that with these 4 million tweets from these 6,000 New Yorkers, he could predict 18% of the person-to-person flu transmissions that happened between them. And that's a remarkable level of resolution when you consider the huge number of variables that go into predicting the next person to give you a flu. And it would be much higher if more people geotag their tweets, and of course if we could model for surface transmission, which is really difficult. But in a future where we have probably UV lasers and UV sensors attached to different surfaces to pick up bacterial agents that meet up with them, and where everybody's geotagging their tweets, that's the main thing. Where everybody's geotagging their tweets, when everybody's making public statements about here I am, here's how I feel, here's who I'm hanging out with for this long, then we'll be able to predict the person that's about to give you the flu. It's pretty remarkable, right? Now, most of you are probably thinking to yourself, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that behavior. I don't feel really great about telling everybody where I'm going and how I'm feeling. And this is true. They find that, Twitter finds that people that are under the weather are a bit less likely to sick tweet. And it was a hard thing for them to figure out how to do. They had to actually teach a machine to understand, because there's 4 million tweets, they had to teach a machine to semantically understand the difference between rhetorical sickness in a tweet and literal sickness. So there's like Bieber fever, which is not a thing, and dengue fever, which is a thing. So after they did that, then they realized this resolution, and it was pretty remarkable. But most of us don't actually feel that comfortable yet geotagging our tweets. It's a behavior that rises roughly in correlation with smartphone ownership. So the more likely you are to own one of these things that lets you do that, then the chances that you're going to partake in that behavior goes up. Same way, you own a bunch of hammers, you become somebody that starts hammering a lot, you own one of these, you get to the point eventually where you just start using the services that this thing brings to you. So having said that, many people, you're not comfortable making that data public. We're freaked out by the NSA. We're freaked out about Target. Target's going to use that information that I just tweeted to target me with context-aware advertising, right? We hate this. This is the future, though. You're walking by, this is the future that we're all moving towards. You're walking by a store, you already feel like you have the flu, and you get hit with, a CVS coupon that says, hey, Patrick, we noticed that you just were hanging out with Stephanie, and boy, does she have that dengue fever or something awful, and you're already probably experiencing symptoms. Why don't you just pop on over here, because we've got a special just for you on echinacea and vitamin C booster, and you're welcome, we love you, CVS. And this is context-aware advertising, and I don't have to tell you that this is, you don't have to be a brilliant futurist to know that that's the future that's going to be showing up in your phones. Not necessarily in terms of a push notification, but probably when you start accessing Facebook and Twitter more often in locations that give some information about where you are. That's just going to happen. We don't like that. Now, what if, and because again, I want you to be excited about the inevitable future. What if the information that you're giving away can also be used to protect you from coercive advertising? So imagine getting a push notification on your phone telling you the probability of you disliking a purchase that you're being pushed to make, telling you that you had a 60% probability of not liking buying vitamin C booster and echinacea at CVS because echinacea is, that solution is based on superstition, and vitamin C booster, you're going to pee most of it out anyway. Skip it. This is information that you also give away in your phone. You actually give it away all the time. It's just that you haven't taken advantage of it yet. There's a startup, though, that can let you do this. I have no proprietary interest in it. It's called TickTrack, started by a guy named Martin Blender, and what it does is it allows you to take all of the different data streams that make up your life. It's your email, it's your, if you've got Fitbit or Nike Plus or Runkeeper or something like that, it lets you take all of your activity level data that you're constantly streaming out. Your geo-tagged tweets, your social network data, pretty much anything that you need. And you can see how they work in correlation with one another. So you can get this view of your life that we constantly feel like Target has on us, except instead it's actually authentically like us. So you can see, for instance, how all of your exchanges with one particular person affects your drinking, or pushing all of your email to the end of the day affects your stress level, or how not working out affects the temperature you like to keep your house. I mean, just all of this stuff that you didn't suspect were related, that actually is related because it is the full data stream of your life. You can actually get a glimpse of it. You get sort of a dashboard view. This is what they're working towards. I think it's really remarkable. And from that, you can protect yourself from marketing that you don't feel really applies to you or that you don't want to participate in. You can protect yourself from everything. You have self-knowledge now. You can use this stuff for really anything in the future. We are going to be able to, on the data that we create, predict the likelihood, the ever-changing probability of falling victim to a crime on the basis of a small number of variables that were used to be really hard to create in usable data form like this, but today are really easy. They are your circumstance, your situation, and your environment. So your circumstance is who you are, and your situation is what you're doing, and your environment is where you are. These are the big variables that go into what's called the victimology continuum. If you know that you are a drug dealer that is dealing drugs in a bad part of town, your score on the victimology continuum is like way up here. You have a very high likelihood compared to the general population of being a victim of a crime based on who you are, what you're doing, where. If you're a politician or a homemaker and you're on a golf course or in a church, then the probability of you being a victim of a crime is much more over here. If you're a drug dealer in church or a homemaker selling drugs, then it sort of goes in between. And this is also information that used to be hard to compute that we now can create data around all of the time based on where we are and who we are and what's going on. And so we can look forward to a future where it's not just police departments that are able to anticipate places where crime is going to happen, which is a program that sounds futuristic but has been in place in New York for decades under Bratton. It's a predictive policing program. It's now similar versions ramped up with computerized power in place all across the country. It's in the future, in the very near future, it's a power that you have, not just police departments, but you, yourself. You can use this stuff for all sorts of things, predicting the likelihood of a particular civil uprising. It's also data that in the future goes into helping objects that are directly in our surroundings anticipate what we're doing so that they can meet our needs much better. And that sounds a little bit weird, but it's the basis of what's going to be the self-driving car program that will be on the streets of Manhattan before too long. It's not just getting, the hard part of that program's already been done, which is getting a machine to understand something about topography, to make predictions about sort of the terrain ahead. Once these machines are interconnected with sensors in their environment, with one another, and they're able to share a common situational awareness of all the people that they're interacting with, then you can look forward to a future where you don't even have to call the car. The car knows when you'll be leaving. It arrives on its own to take you to the next place. It parks far away so that you don't have to think about where to park it, and we don't, as a city, have to allocate resources to it. And all of that happens on the basis of information that we're now giving away all of the time. We're going to have 10 times fewer cars in the next 20 years, not just because of a vamp up in technology, but because of data we give away, and that's a good thing. So, long story short, we've arrived at an age where we create information in everything that we do, and there's no going back. And What's unfortunate is that instead of seeing that as the opportunity that it is, we've decided to see it as a threat. There's a lot to be concerned about. There's a lot of conversations that have to happen. But if we can just take a moment and learn to listen to the information we already make, then the future is as bright as anything we can imagine. So, thank you.
You said that individuals are going to be more empowered by big data than, I guess, traditional actors today, such as the NSA or private corporations. What is the operational logic there? Why do you think individuals will be able to edge out the advantages, the resource advantages, the connections to large data sets that governments have or private corporations have?
Well, part of it has to do with the transference of data as a thing. So when it becomes apparent to all of us that there are uses for our data, then I think you're going to see an ecosystem of startups like TickTrack begin to emerge to sell that information to us in a way that's useful to us as consumers. And the B2B market at that point is going to look small and squalid in comparison. This is somewhat of an article of faith, but I think that it's validated by everything that has happened in technology since the year 2000. So that is eventually, to reach the big money, you have to start hitting consumers and not just working as a data scientist at Target, because that's the way capitalism actually works, is you reach consumers, not just other great big businesses. So that's one aspect of it, is that when we begin to realize the utility of this, you'll see more TickTracks, and there's like new ones sprouting up every day. Another one is Prime, also no proprietary interest. It just sprouted up like very, very recently, and all it does is lets you digitize. It gives you access to your own digital medical records on your phone, so you can send them wherever. It's doing the entire thing that Obamacare can't quite do at the amount of money we're spending on it, and it does it sort of automatically because it's user-empowered rather than top-down empowered. So I'm very hopeful about that. But also, these big institutions in an era of decline, they can't hold on to this stuff. Okay? So a lot of times I get questions sort of about Edward Snowden, right? And how freaked out should we be by the NSA? Well, whatever you think of Edward Snowden, whether you think he's a patriot or whether you think he's a traitor or you think he's a patriot that should maybe be prosecuted or you think he's a traitor that should be let go because of the First Amendment, that doesn't matter. History will regard him as this with absolute certainty. Edward Snowden is the most famous systems administrator that has ever lived. He gave a talk where he was really adamant about this one point. It's almost, I rarely see him this adamant in an interview, but he was really adamant to point out that he wasn't just some low-level, contractor with the NSA. He was important, damn it. He was not. He was not an unusual person at all. The NSA had this stuff. To use it, they have to give it a little bit away. They have to expose it. And so he did to them what we feel like they did to us. Those two things combined suggest to me that if we dare be ambitious enough, if we dare ask the right questions, if we all continue to be vigilant in government overreach of data and corporate overreach of data, and that's a big part of it, then we can absolutely realize the great potential of this new age.
In a place like China, it's very difficult for dissidents as it is to sort of get together and try to do something about their repressive government. Now, we're on the 25th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. You're saying that the cell phone can predict where we are going to be in 2 years from now. The cell phones can also predict for the government where the people will be in Tiananmen Square. And it's all very well and good to say we don't have to worry about that in this country. But what about countries like China? And what can we do to make sure that countries like China can't get access to that kind of information?
I actually don't necessarily agree that we shouldn't be too worried about that in this country. There was an incident in 2003 where police used some limited social network data to predict a nonviolent protest against the WTO. It's far less common in this country. I think we have every reason to be proud of that fact, but I don't necessarily disagree. And it's a very valid question, and China's actually a big point on that. I think that the powers of predictive policing in China, we're going to see, and I don't want to harp on China. China's been through a lot of changes lately. But I think that if you want to look at the place most likely to have perhaps a big nightmare scenario in terms of predicting police, that China is a very good example of that. So yes, what do we do about it here in this room? How many of us, it really starts with all of us. How many of us subscribe to a newsletter, a human rights newsletter, bringing us news out of China? That's sort of like a place to start. At some point, someone will be preemptively arrested, if not necessarily in China, then perhaps in some place where there is an equal amount of anti-authoritarian strength. And the question is, what do we do when we hear about that? Because that hopefully will be sooner rather than later. And how do we all respond sort of en masse? But yeah, much of the hope that I have in this book is really predicated on the idea of living in a democracy and living in an economy that allows startups to flourish and provide services to people that, that they want, that provides government mechanisms of accountability for government. And in places where those are absent, then the potential of big data to be used, to be much more abused, is very real. I think eventually it does open up all of humanity to a much brighter future. But I think that a lot of people, there's a good chance in authoritarian settings that people will go through a very difficult, a lot of people, innocent people will go through a very difficult transition phase before that happens. I don't have a clear solution on how to save China from policing and big data future and abuses, except to say that for all our worry about China, in many ways it is getting better than it was in the 90s. And I think that there's something inevitable about that too. All right.
Well, even though our time has come to an end, I can predict that if you stay and have a drink and join in the conversation, that Patrick will be very happy to answer all your questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.